Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 63, which is headlined by a fight at the top of the featherweight division between Kattar versus Arnold Allen. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there's going to be a Base AI recap from the UFC prediction software from last weekend's monster event at UFC 280. Base AI has performed really well over the last couple of weeks. No surprise that we've actually done a couple of tweaks a couple of weeks ago as well, with the algorithms to make sure that they're on trend, that everything's running smoothly. So like I say, since we've run those tweaks, we've had two really good events and we continue to make that roll. So if you are interested in Base AI and the UFC prediction software and the results, make sure you check out that Base AI recap, which will be in the Base AI playlist on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But you're here for the breakdowns, and that's exactly where we're going to go right now. The main event, I've already mentioned it, Kattar versus Arnold Allen in the featherweight division. It's a really, really good fight, this fight, to be honest, and it could potentially spin out a title shot for either fighter. I mean, it's not guaranteed, and there are a couple of fighters that might like to say that they've got that title shot before these guys, but a solid performance, a finish would definitely cement somebody's name as a contender for sure. And listen, both fighters here are just phenomenal fighters. They're really, really good fighters. Arnold Allen's unbeaten in the UFC. He's coming into this fight with a ton of confidence after absolutely destroying Dan Hooker, which, to be honest with you, not many fighters can say that they've done that. I mean, Edson Barboza did it, and Barboza did it viciously, but Arnold Allen didn't even need to go into a second round to do it. He came out there, boxing heavy fighter, just absolutely lit Dan Hooker up, got caught in an exchange, got a little bit too excited, nearly got dropped himself, but kept his composure, kept coming forward. And it's funny actually because the finish wasn't in that first moment where Arnold Allen rocked Hooker, he had him hurt, then Hooker rocked Arnold Allen, then there was another exchange. The fight actually calmed down for like maybe 20, 30 seconds after that, and then Arnold Allen just, got himself back together, remained calm, composed, and then went at him again and then dropped him and then finished him after that. So credit to Arnold Allen for that. But then on the other side, you've also got a boxing heavy striker in Kattar. Kattar is a dangerous boxer, good combinations. He's crisp, he's sharp, he's got good volume. And like I said, but from a stylistic perspective, both fighters here are going to have a really good fighter in front of them. I expect to see a fight that's won and lost on the feet. I think the wrestling and grappling, I just don't think it's going to, I think it's going to be a non-factor in this fight. Even if we do see a takedown or even if we do see a little bit of topside control, I just don't think there's that action on the mat is going to be significant enough for this fight to either be finished there or for the judges to take that into too much consideration when it comes to the winner and the loser of the fight. So I think we are going to see a striking fight. Now, I kind of feel that Kattar's style here is going to pose Arnold Allen problems, but the problems that he's going to pose are going to be the same problems that Josh Emmett found out last time out. And what I mean by that is Kattar, I think, could potentially get up on the numbers here. I do see him, landing more volume, but it's volume that's a jab, that's good 1-2s, that's good crisp combinations, but doesn't ultimately make him look like he's trying to actually put his opponent out and get that finish at all times. Whereas I think on the flip side, Arnold Allen's going to be throwing the power shots. I think he's going to be throwing the body shots. I think he's going to be the one looking more aggressive out the two. And this is pretty much the same way in how Josh Emmett beat Kattar, because in my opinion, Josh Emmett was the rightful winner in that fight because he was landing the power shots, because he was looking to find the finish. The judges love that type of fight. So if this does go to a decision, I think Kattar is going to be slightly up on the numbers, but I think Arnold Allen's going to be looking better in the judges' eyes, again, from that aggressive power punch perspective. And I think if there is a finish, I don't see any fighter really having the upside in the finish. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying that neither fighter can get a finish. I just think the chances of either fighter finishing are probably around the same as each other. I think it's going to be a really close fight. I think it's going to be a really competitive fight. I'm interested to see how it does actually play out on the feet and who does start getting the better of the fight, especially in the early moments, and then who can take over later. But I do like the trend of Arnold Allen. I do like the fact that he's unbeaten. He's never lost in the UFC, and he's been he's been looking better and better each time that we've seen him, you know, a better version of himself, which is exactly what you want to see from a young fighter. I think he's the fighter that is surging a little bit harder right now, a little bit faster right now. So for those reasons, I am going to be siding with Arnold Allen to win this fight. And in the next fight, the co-main event, we've got Tim Means versus Max Griffin. This is an interesting fight. I think that, again, it's a fight that's going to be quite explosive. I think the early moments of this fight is going to be quite interesting as well. I think the fight is ultimately going to be won and lost with what happens on the feet, even though both fighters have shown, obviously, their love for the striking, but they also have shown the fact that they're relatively well-rounded with some wrestling, with some grappling, and both fighters have had their fights where they've had to bail on the striking and really go down to the wrestling and the grappling on the mat. So they are both quite similar fighters. However, I think that Max Griffin is going to be more dangerous in this fight. I think that he's more durable at this stage. I think that he's a fighter with more power, more aggression, more forward pressure. And I think although Tim Means is, you know, he's not completely washed, he's not over the hill. Obviously, he is on a decline at this stage in his career, you know, that's obvious. But I still think he's going to be competitive. I just don't think that he's going to be able to keep up with that forward pressure and the aggression what Max Griffin's going to be showing on the other side. I think that Tim Means is a fighter that definitely flourishes better when he's moving forward, when he can dictate the pace and the range of the fight, whereas Max Griffin just loves to be in your face and loves that forward pressure and aggression. And if it means him eating a shot or two to land 2 or 3 himself, then that's exactly what he's going to do. And it's that type of mentality that in this fight, I think that more often than not, Max Griffin's going to be the one pushing forwards and getting Tim Means on the back foot. Tim Means, like I've said, I just don't think he's as comfortable on the back foot as he is on the front foot, and I think that's going to cause him a lot of problems in this fight. I think Griffin is going to be able to land good volume here. I think if he goes to the scorecards, we are likely to see Max Griffin probably looking better in the judges' eyes from that forward pressure, from that aggression, from the fact that he's looking like he's trying to finish the fight at all times. If we do see a little bit of wrestling and grappling, then again, I think that's going to be nullified and be a bit of a non-factor. And then if there's a finish, I think the finishing upside is on Max Griffin, even though I wouldn't rule that a Tim Means finish because he still hits hard and he's still got that finishing ability. I think there's just a little bit more upside with the side of Max Griffin here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Max Griffin to win this fight. In the next fight, this is actually going to be a really fun one. We've got Dustin Jacoby with a relatively quick return after his last fight against Khalil Rountree. Now, from a betting line perspective, I'm actually noticing a little bit of a trend with what happens with Dustin Jacoby fights. So he opens up, the bookies open him up as a relatively sized favourite. And then what happens during fight week is the public money comes in, and then the bookies are obviously adjusting the odds. And Dustin Jacoby is actually coming in, you know, much shorter than what he opened. And that trend looks to be happening this time around as well. You know, he opened up a bigger favourite, but the money seems to be coming in on Khalil Rountree. And I kind of get that in a way, actually, with this fight, because Khalil Rountree, he is a dangerous fighter. He does hit hard. He's explosive. He's got good combinations. His attacks are also really varied from his fundamentals, and then when you start looking at the oblique kicks, the kicks to the legs, to the body, to the head, and then even when you're on the ground, he's one of not many fighters that I can think of that will throw kicks to the body of his opponents whilst his opponents are down and he's up. Obviously, it's risky in case you do hit their head because, you know, you're then kicking a downed opponent, but he's got a very varied striking style. Like, this fight's going to be interesting because, again, I feel like both fighters are going to get the exact fight that they want. Both fighters are predominantly strikers. Both fighters don't really, well, not that they don't like fighting wrestlers or grapplers, but they prefer to, in my opinion, I feel like they prefer to stand in front of a fighter that's not going to try and take them down, wrestle and grapple them. And both fighters are going to get that here. I think if we do see any wrestling and grappling, it's more likely to be from Jacoby's side. And that maybe adds a different path to victory for him. But ultimately, I think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet now. With Khalil Rountree, we're either going to see two versions. We're either going to see that aggressive forward pressure version where he's coming out hot like a bull trying to take Jacoby's head off. But then the problem with that style is it can be nullified with, well, not nullified, but halted and prevented if you can get Rowntree's respect. And the thing is, Dustin Jacoby's a high-level striker with kickboxing background experience, and I do think that he's going to be able to land something hard on Khalil Rountree early in this fight, not necessarily to knock him out, but just to get that respect, halt Khalil Rountree, and at that point, it turns into a point fight. a point scoring style from Khalil Rountree, where he'll try and out volume and try and outpoint you. And that's the second type of Khalil Rountree that we'll see. And I think in that type of fight, I think that Dustin Jacoby is just going to be the more technical striker. He's going to land more volume. He's going to hit a little bit harder. And like I've already alluded to, he might decide to mix things up a little bit with the wrestling and grappling as well, which would, in my opinion, be smart. I feel like Dustin Jacoby's got more ways to win this fight. I think he's the better technical striker. I think you can't ignore his power either. I've spoken about the power of Khalil Rountree, but to knock Durden Jung out like that, and just be able to, put that power on his previous opponents and hurt them, rock them, it speaks volumes. And I think that Dustin Jacoby has got a decent fight ahead of him here, as long as he doesn't get knocked out by Rountree, which again is a possibility. When you're looking at the finishing upside, you probably would side it on the side of Dustin Jacoby, but not by a great margin. I think Dustin Jacoby is going to be the better fighter, where the fight's more than likely going to be won and lost, and that's in the striking department. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dustin Jacoby to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the heavyweight division, we've got the newcomer Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Jared Vanderaa. And I think, although it's a newcomer, although he's coming from the Contender Series, and although it's heavyweight, and we have seen these types of fights before just not go the way that we think they're going to go, with it being the first fight in the UFC, the actual UFC debut, I do think that Cortes-Acosta is actually a really good fighter, and I think he's going to be a fighter that's going to cause Jared Vanderaa a lot of problems. The one side to Cortes-Acosta where I do think that he needs to improve his game a little bit is he can get taken down a little bit too easily. And I think Vanderaa might have to exploit that in this fight to be able to give himself every chance of winning the fight. But the thing is, Cortes-Acosta has shown that even though he can get taken down a little bit too easily with body locks, with traditional style wrestling, and he can get put on his back, flat on his back, he has shown an ability to get back up to his feet. And that's key, because as long as he's working to get back up to his feet, he's always going to be a difficult fighter to keep down. And fighters, especially in the heavyweight division, are going to be expending energy trying to get the fight down to the mat. And if he's popping up relatively soon after the takedown, then again, it's cardio expenditure for that, or for Waldo Cortes-Acosta's opponents. Ultimately here, I think that Cortes-Acosta's striking is just light years ahead of Jared Vanderaa. I think from a decision perspective, should it go 3 rounds, I think Cortes-Acosta will be landing the better quality shots. He'll be looking like the fighter that's trying to finish the fight at all times. And I just think that he's going to be able to land a lot on Vanderaa, who does seem to be quite hittable. He lost that decision to Chase Sherman, which, no disrespect to Chase Sherman, he's on like his 16th stint in the UFC. I just don't think that was a good viewing from Jared Vanderaa at all. And then you put Waldo Cortes-Acosta in there, who's a better striker than Sherman, a more dangerous striker than Sherman. And I think that whatever Sherman did against Vanderaa, Cortes-Acosta is just going to go above and beyond that. I think it's a tough fight for Jared Vanderaa, who might be looking at a tough position after this fight if he does lose and if he does get knocked out. But I think Waldo Cortes-Acosta, with some development, with some refining to his game, and just progressing in the right way up the UFC ladder, I do feel like he's one of those fighters that could potentially be in and around that top 15 in maybe 12 to 18 months' time. But in this specific fight, I think he's going to have too much on the feet for Jared Vanderaa. If he does get taken down, I think he's going to be able to get back up to his feet. So for those reasons, I'm picking Waldo Cortes-Acosta to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tresean Gore versus Josh Fremd. And it's an interesting one, but I also feel that I'm just a little disappointed with Tresean Gore. I kind of feel that I got that analysis of him a little bit incorrect. I felt like I put a little bit too much hype on him. From the Ultimate Fighter, even though he is relatively experienced from a pro career perspective, in the Ultimate Fighter, he looked like an absolute killer, like he'd had good Muay Thai, that he was difficult to take down because of the power, because of the Muay Thai, and if you did take him down, he was a fighter that could work his way back up to his feet. But I think what we found since I've watched him in the UFC against a couple of different opponents now is he can be very gun-shy, he can be taken down, that can then make him a little bit hesitant to let his hands go and strike. And I feel that he just leaves things a little bit too late in the UFC, like he starts slow, tries to get reads, and that's not a bad thing. But when you're trying to get reads on an opponent that's teeing off on you, that's really getting ahead of you, it means you're going to have to play catch up later. And then if you leave it too late, it could potentially be a situation where you need a finish. And you never want to be in that position as a fighter in the UFC where you need a finish to win the fight, because in the UFC, finishes don't come as easy as what they do on the Ultimate Fighter or on the regional scene as well. And I think Josh Fremd's this gritty, ugly type of fighter that's going to just be able to nullify Tresean Gore. Now, you can never rule out Tresean Gore knocking somebody out because he genuinely does have power. He genuinely can look like a scary dude inside the cage as well. But I think Josh Fremd is also a decent striker. I think he's going to be able to do enough here to stay safe, to land back on Tresean Gore as well. But Josh Fremd's got a decent wrestling and grappling game as well. He went tooth and nail on his UFC debut with Anthony Hernandez, who's looked like an absolute beast with his wrestling and grappling lately. So I think that Josh Fremd's going to have big advantages when it comes to the wrestling and grappling department. And if that's where he goes early in this fight, then I think it's going to be a long night or potentially even a short night for Tresean Gore. Outside of Gore landing that shot that knocks Fremd out, I just don't see Gore, if this fight goes to a decision, I just don't see Gore outworking Josh Fremd over 15 minutes here throughout the 3 rounds. And if there's a finish, then yes, like I said, there's a good chance that Gore could find that finish. But again, if the fight's playing out on the feet, if there's a lot of wrestling and grappling, then again, that upside does have to switch over to Josh Fremd from a finishing perspective. So I think it's a tough fight for Tresean Gore. I don't know whether a loss here is actually low-key going to be a really good thing for him to, come out of the UFC, go back to the regional scene, pick up 3, 4, 5 wins over a couple of years and then come back to the UFC. He's young enough to do it, and especially with the miles on the clock, he hasn't got too many miles on the clock. So I think that might be, like I've said, low-key the best thing for happen to Gore, to come out of the UFC, go onto the regional scene, pick up wins, get some confidence, develop as a fighter, and then come back to the UFC for a second stint, which we've seen multiple times before anyway. But anyway, I'm digressing. As for this fight, I think it's a tough one for Tresean Gore outside of the knockout, so I'm picking Josh Fremd to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Andrei Arlovski versus Rogerio de Lima. Now, this fight's actually really interesting because the first thing that stood out to me when I saw the two names is these fighters train at American Top Team Florida. So I thought maybe one of the fighters has left, potentially Rogerio de Lima might have gone to Brazil to do a fight camp. But actually looking at their Instagrams, or the last time I looked at the Instagrams, it did look like they were both still at ATT Florida. I'm pretty sure I'm probably missing something here. I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm sure somebody listening is going to have some sort of comment to put in the replies as an explanation, but it does look like they are still training at ATT Florida. But as for the style versus style, listen, I think it's a tough fight for Andrei Arlovski. Arlovski at this point, as we all know, he was a brutal finisher back in the days, a legend, an OG of the world of mixed martial arts. But he has turned into that point scoring type of fighter. The power has left him quite considerably over the years, and then you add in the fact that he became a fighter that had been known for durability issues, so he tightened everything up, and that's where he's at. But then on the other side, you've got Rogerio de Lima that will come forward, that does land bombs, that's going to land hard low kicks. I don't think that Andrei Arlovski is going to be able to eat too many hard shots from Rogerio de Lima. He is a beast. He's an absolute beast, and I think even when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think that De Lima could potentially exploit that from Andrei Arlovski, take him down, get in a top position, lay and pray, ground and pound, do just enough for a referee not to separate them and split them up. I just feel that there's more ways for De Lima to win this fight, and I feel with the power that he possesses, his finishing ability, he's got the finishing upside as well. And of course, these two guys, whether they're still training together in the same gym or not, which is weird to say, they're going to know a lot about each other. So I feel that both fighters are going to know or have a good idea of how they're going to match up against each other, and if one is going to be a little bit more hesitant or concerned facing the other inside the cage. And I just feel that De Lima is going to be the more comfortable fighter, the fighter that's got more ways to win the fight, and also the fighter with a big finishing upside here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rogerio de Lima to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chase Hooper versus Steve Garcia. And Chase Hooper's finally making the improvements and developments that we expected, quite a while ago from the striking perspective. Obviously, his grappling's always been really tricky, really good, and he's very difficult to deal with, and he's a bit of a nightmare. But his striking's very slowly starting to catch up now, and it looked a little bit better last time out, and I'm expecting it to look a little bit better this time out as well, because he's so young. Like I said, coming into the UFC, so fresh, relatively green, and the development period that Chase Hooper's in right now is crucial to his performances and how far that he can go into the UFC. And against Steve Garcia, I think the UFC have actually matched Chase Hooper up quite well here, because Steve Garcia has got that level of striking, he's got that level of wrestling, he's got that gritty, ugly, grinding style where he will look for takedowns and look to get the fights down to the mat, and that's exactly where Chase Hooper's going to want the fight. So I'm ultimately thinking, well, what's Steve Garcia going to do here? And I just think Steve Garcia is going to come into this fight. I think he's just going to want to concentrate on himself, focus on what he's good at. And for that reason, I think that he's going to be shooting takedowns. And I think we are going to see a fight that's got plenty of wrestling, plenty of grappling, some position reversals, sweeps, submission attempts as well. I think we're going to see a really, really fun, scrambly, grappling type of fight here. I think on the feet, Garcia does still have the edge over Chase Hooper, but that edge isn't as great as what it would have been a couple of fights ago, maybe a couple of years ago. But like I said, I think that we're going to see plenty of action on the mat, and that's ultimately where I think the better work's going to be done here. And I think the better grappler is going to be Chase Hooper. Yes, Steve Garcia is tricky and he's a bit of a nightmare to deal with at times on the mat, but I just think Chase Hooper's maybe a level above him in regards to the grappling, and that's going to show on the night. I think that Hooper's got a decent fight ahead of him stylistically. They've not put him in there with a killer that's just going to defend the takedowns and take Hooper's head off. I think Hooper's going to be able, at the very least, be competitive, but if the fight is played out a lot on the mat, I think Hooper's going to have plenty of opportunities to look great. So for those reasons, I'm picking Chase Hooper to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Joseph Holmes versus Yong Park. Now, I think Holmes he's going to have moments in this fight. I don't think Holmes is a bad fighter. He's tall, he's big, he's athletic, he's got power. He's also got a decent grappling game as well. Wrestling, probably catching up to the grappling. But I think that he's going to have his moments in this fight. Problem is, I just don't think those moments are going to be enough to get him over the line here. Yong Park's going to be the more experienced fighter here. He's definitely got good fight IQ, the better fight IQ. He's got that experience now in the UFC, fighting against much higher level competition than what he's got in front of him right now in Joseph Holmes. And that's no disrespect to Holmes. I just mean that Yong Park's genuinely fought a better level of competition in the UFC and in his MMA career. And I think that's going to show here. The one thing that I don't like about Yong Park is the fact that he is going to be shorter. He is going to be at a physical and athletic disadvantage here. And I think that he's not going to have everything his way. Like I said, Holmes is going to have his moments in this fight, but when you're looking at a fighter that's just slightly pulling away with the rounds, just slightly edging things, when you look at different paths to victory, I think that the paths are more solid on Yong Park's side. His striking's not that bad. He does need to be careful he's not in the too many crazy exchanges with Joseph Holmes that puts him in a position where Holmes can knock him out. But then when you look at the wrestling, Park's wrestling's good, his topside grappling is savvy, it's sound. He's not a massively dangerous fighter, but he just knows what to do. He's got that experience, he knows just how to edge those rounds out. And I think we are going to see a good fight here, a relatively close fight, but ultimately when you're looking at a fighter that, as I've already mentioned, is pulling away with the rounds, is using his experience to just get the slight edges over his opponent, that fighter does look like it's going to be Yong Park. So I'm not ruling out a Joseph Holmes win. I think that, you know, if I watch the fight and see Holmes knock Yong Park out, I'm not going to be totally surprised, but it is going to be tough to outfight and out-game plan somebody like Yong Park at this level where Joseph Holmes is at. So for those reasons, I'm picking Yong Park to win this fight. And finally, the last fight on the breakdown of this episode, we've got Roman Dolidze versus Phil Hawes. And this is a really good fight. Phil Hawes, obviously, insane power, is that real typical boxing, wrestling type of fighter where he will land power, but then he's got that wrestling background to fall on. And I think Roman Dolidze, from the flip side, he's a fighter that's improving and developing. He came into the UFC relatively raw, relatively green, but obviously training at Extreme Couture with Eric Nixick. His wrestling's getting really good, and although he looks like a dangerous, aggressive striker from the outset, the dude's grappling is actually where he's really good. He's fought and competed in the ADCC tournaments, a champion in Asia and Oceania, I believe. So his grappling credentials are actually really good, and he's even submitted guys like Nikita Krylov in grappling tournaments, and you know, Krylov's a really good grappler himself. And the thing is with Dolidze, like I said, his striking's starting to catch up now from a technical perspective. He is big, he does land heavy, so he does have power as well. If you're looking at finishing upside, you probably would still give that to Phil Hawes as the dangerous fighter. But what Roman Dolidze has done in his last couple of fights is he's able to close the distance, get a hold of his opponent, and use his physicality and his strength, his freakish strength, to just hold his opponents against the cage, really run the clock down, make the fights a little bit boring, a little bit ugly. Obviously not his last fight because he got an early knockout. I'm talking about the fights prior to that. So Roman Dolidze just has this ability where he's either going to be able to land something hard, or he's going to close the distance, really grind the fight out, or he's got takedowns as well, and his entries into his wrestling takedowns are starting to get a lot better, to the point where he's not overexerting energy. The thing is, how easy is it going to be able to take Hawes down, with Hawes having a good wrestling background? It's a really good fight, this fight. It's going to be a really close fight, because if Hawes doesn't get that knockout early and Dolidze is clinching against him on the cage, really draining that gas tank and making Hawes tired, then it's going to be an interesting watch going further down the stretch. And is Hawes going to go to his wrestling, knowing that Dolidze's grappling's that good? And Dolidze's got that type of grappling where he'll just try and wrap a leg up for a knee bar or a heel hook, just to be able to reverse position if he needs to, or just make sure his opponents are not getting the better of him on the mat. He's a tricky fighter to deal with. And like I said, it is a very, very well-matched fight if that knockout doesn't happen early in this fight. And I kind of feel that that knockout ability from Hawes, the better level of competition he's going to be fighting, the less chance he has of getting that knockout in round one. I feel that this might be that type of fight where we do see the fight go deeper into the fight, where both fighters are looking a little bit tired, where both fighters are looking to wrestle and grapple. And I think it's going to be close from that perspective. But if we do see the wrestling and grappling, I think Dolidze is just going to be able to get the better of Hawes from a grappling perspective. I also think that from that clinch perspective against the cage, that's an opportunity for Dolidze to empty the gas tank of Hawes as well, who still has that question mark over his cardio. So although it's going to be a close fight, I am going to very slightly side with Roman Dolidze to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of The Breakdown at UFC Vegas 63. We do have 2 more fights that could potentially be added to the card, because there's only 9 at the minute. But we've got Cody Durden that lost his opponent in Clayton Rodriguez, and we also got Christian Rodriguez that lost his opponent in Garrett Armfield. So I imagine the UFC are going to add those 2 fights to the card at some point, getting potential opponents, because I don't think the UFC will want to run into fight week with 9 fights. If any further fights do get added, I'll add those fights and give a pick in the description of the YouTube video as well. So if there is a fight added, again, I'll add that into the description and give a pick for you guys. Aside from that, as always, I appreciate you guys watching, tuning in. If you do enjoy the videos, if I do help you win any money with the analysis, with the predictions, please give the channel a subscription. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel is what I'm trying to say. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, so we really do appreciate all the love we're getting at the minute. Aside from that, I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.